The Toonerville Gang, also known as Toonerville Rifa 13, is a Hispanic street gang primarily based in the Atwater Village neighborhood of northeast Los Angeles, California. Established in the 1930s, Toonerville is one of the oldest and most well-known gangs in Los Angeles. The Toonerville Gang, known for their distinctive blue color, has a presence in various locations, including Tujunga. Their members are easily identifiable, often seen wearing Dodger clothing and anything that displays the letter T. They are involved in the sale of narcotics, murder, attempted murder, robberies, carjackings, and kidnappings. They are also known to retaliate against snitches. Even Samaniego, known as Gangster, Clifton Christopher Sawyer, known as Stranger, and Carlos Perdomo, known as Silly, were known members of the Toonerville Gang and had close ties to one another. Two other members, Aaron Stapleton, or Huero, and Gildardo Pina, or Shaggy, were also part of the gang. The story takes us to a house located at the intersection of Silverton and Valmont in Tujunga, which was famously referred to as the Tweaker House due to its popularity among methamphetamine users, known as tweakers. The residents of this house were Michelle Pace, Luis Vasquez, and Earl Heim. Regular visitors included Terry Weitzman, Donald Nelson, and Josh Green. Josh Krippner, also a regular visitor, was known to sell drugs there. Sean Kidd, a methamphetamine addict and local drug dealer, also frequented the Tweaker House. In the past, Green and Sawyer had been good friends, but their relationship soured when Green started using methamphetamines and associating with the Tweakers, while Sawyer became more involved with the Toonerville Gang. Krippner had connections within the Toonerville Gang, specifically with Sawyer and Huero. Although Kidd was not affiliated with either the Toonerville Gang or the Tweakers, he often spent time at a house and trailer on Glory Avenue, collectively referred to as the Glory Avenue residence. This residence was a popular spot for Samaniego, Perdomo, Sawyer, and Huero. Before November 6, 2005, whispers were circulating around the Tweaker House in the neighborhood. The topic? A piece of paperwork that contained the names of two individuals, Huero and Bonji. This document was understood to mean that Huero was snitching on an individual named Bonji. The tension escalated when Bonji's residence was raided by the police. Following the raid, Josh Green had a copy of this paperwork and was discussing it with anyone who would listen. He even gave a copy to Earl Heim, but the information was not welcomed by everyone. Sawyer, aware of the brewing storm, warned Green. The Toonerville Gang members were upset with the Tweakers for spreading rumors about Huero. Green was advised to stay away from the gang members and not to mention the paperwork to them. Sean Kidd saw the paperwork for the first time on November 6, 2005 at the Tweaker House, as Green was showing it to someone else. Kidd and Green then went to buy marijuana from Huero at his residence on Mount Air. When they arrived, Huero acted aggressively, appearing as if he were reaching for a gun, which was very unusual behavior, as he had never acted this way towards Kidd. Later that day, Green called Kidd to meet him at the Glory Avenue residence. There they were joined by Carlos Perdomo and a woman known as Dreamer. Perdomo, in a show of intimidation, flashed an old cowboy revolver tucked in his waistband at Kidd. He then demanded the paperwork from Green, which Green reluctantly handed over. Perdomo suggested they should visit Huero at his apartment on Mount Air. When they arrived there, Perdomo and Huero exchanged a few words. Soon after, a white minivan pulled up and Samaniego and Sawyer emerged with Ashley Harvey and Pena. This white minivan was borrowed from Ashley Harvey's parents. Ashley Harvey was dating Sawyer in July 2005 and began staying with him. Harvey and Sawyer were deeply entangled in the world of drugs, specifically methamphetamines, and they used the drug together. She later met Samaniego at Sawyer's house. Harvey later slept with Perdomo in August 2005, and they all continued to hang out to do drugs. On the night of November 6, 2005, the white minivan, borrowed from Harvey's parents, became the chosen mode of transport for the group, as the Toonerville Gang members had no other car. At 10 p.m., Harvey drove to the residence on Glory Avenue, where she picked up Sawyer and Samaniego. The next stop was to pick up Pina before heading to Huero's apartment, where Perdomo and Kid were together on a single bicycle. Pina confronted Kid aggressively, inquiring if he was the person in question. He wanted to know whether he was the one in possession of the paperwork. Samaniego, attempting to defuse the tension, responded, "No, he's cool." Samaniego then shifted the conversation to the subject of the paperwork. He questioned Kid and asked if he had seen it. Kid told him that he has. The four members of the Toonerville Gang, Samaniego, Perdomo, Sawyer, and Hoyro, then had a private discussion away. They were careful to keep their voices low, ensuring that neither Kid nor Harvey could overhear their conversation. The four men and Harvey entered the van and instructed Harvey to drive to the Tweaker house. Their intention was to see who was there. Harvey parked the van a block away from the Tweaker house. Kid, who had already left on his bicycle, saw the van pass him and saw it again parked near the Tweaker house. The men instructed Harvey to wait in the car while they proceeded towards the house. Harvey testified that within 10 seconds of the men exiting the van, she heard gunshots from the direction of the Tweaker house. However, she also told detectives that it was 10 minutes later. Kid was stopped near the Tweaker house, and suddenly the silence was shattered by the sound of 4 gunshots. Kid, startled, looked around to see what was happening. From the shadows, he saw figures emerge. He initially said that he recognized the figures as Samaniego and Perdomo. He couldn't see their faces, but he recognized them from their silhouettes, their clothing, their height, and their body shape. Seconds later, the men scrambled back to the van, their faces full of paranoia and apprehension. After Kid saw the men enter the van parked nearby, he then ventured into the driveway, where he saw a horrifying sight. There, he found several people trying to help Donald Nelson, who was the victim of the shooting and a regular visitor of the Tweaker house. Kid, not wanting to be present when the police arrived, decided to leave. After the men got in the car, Harvey was told to drive to Glory Avenue. Upon arrival, the men quickly went into a house, plunging it into darkness as they switched off all the lights and locked the doors. Although Harvey did not see any weapons that night, she assumed that the men shot someone. This was due to their behavior, and the fact that she saw Perdomo casually waving around what she describes as a cowboy gun, a revolver, the next day. She can't recall who had the gun the previous night, and she was too scared to talk to detectives about the incident. Sawyer had warned her to keep her mouth shut, threatening that they would both be dead if she spoke up. On the night of the shooting, Weitzman, Luis, Heim, and Pace were present at the Tweaker house. Weitzman, Luis, and Heim were inside the house, while Pace was sleeping in her station wagon parked in the driveway. Nelson had already left the house, and approximately 10 minutes afterwards, Weitzman stepped outside, attempting to persuade Pace to come inside. Despite his efforts, Pace remained in her car. Moments later, Weitzman noticed 5 young men standing in the driveway. They were dressed like gang members. One of them, wearing a beanie and with a pierced left eyebrow containing a barbell, stood out. Perdomo had a pierced left eyebrow at the time. He approached Weitzman, asking if a man named Green was present, and if they could go inside to check. Despite his gang-like appearance, he was articulate and did not sound like a cholo. Weitzman, taken aback, said she would check. Inside the house, Weitzman told Heim that 5 angry individuals were standing in the driveway, demanding to see Green. As she relayed this information to Heim, the quiet night was shattered by the sound of gunfire. 4, maybe 5 shots rang out from the driveway. Heim, in a bid to protect Weitzman, pushed her to the ground and ran outside. Nelson was lying motionless in the driveway. Weitzman, gathering her courage, went outside and saw a horrifying scene. Heim and Pace were standing over Nelson's lifeless body. But the 5 young men, the ones who had been angrily demanding to see Green, were nowhere to be found. On the 6th of November 2005, a call came through to the local police station. Detective Martinez responded and went to the Tweaker house. Lying in the driveway was the bullet-riddled body of Nelson. Upon closer inspection, Detective Martinez noted that there were no weapons on Nelson or in the immediate vicinity. Adding to the mystery, a green baggie was found in Nelson's mouth. It contained a white powdery substance, resembling methamphetamine. This discovery hinted at the possible involvement of drug-related disputes in the murder. The coroner's report stated that Nelson had sustained multiple gunshot wounds, 5 of which were likely fatal. 4 projectiles were recovered from Nelson's body. The coroner's examination revealed no suturing or stippling on Nelson's body. This was significant, as it indicated that Nelson was not shot from close range, but rather from a distance of a few feet away. The crime scene had no shell casings. This absence of evidence immediately caught the attention of Detective Martinez. He surmised that the murder weapon was likely a revolver. This was because, unlike automatic and semi-automatic handguns, which expel casings as they are fired, revolvers retain their casings. A firearm examiner was brought in to examine the 4 projectiles removed from Nelson's body and found that they were .22 caliber long rifle rounds. This type of ammunition can be fired from a variety of firearms, including rifles, handguns, revolvers, and semi-automatics. This broadened the scope of potential murder weapons, making the investigation even more complex. The bullet fragments bore similar characteristics, suggesting they could have come from the same gun. However, they were too badly damaged to allow the examiner to confirm this theory. Joe Freeman, an elderly man, and his daughter, Julie Malcolm, lived a quiet life in Tujunga. Sawyer had moved in with them for a year. Joe Freeman stated that Sawyer often had friends over, including Perdomo. Freeman, however, claimed not to know Samaniego or Perdomo. Freeman owned a 9-shot, long-barreled .22 caliber pistol, which he kept in plain view on his nightstand. During an interview with detectives, Freeman realized that his handgun and holster were missing. The detectives scoured the house, but the handgun and holster were still not found. The day before the police interview, Freeman heard something unusual in the backyard. Detectives, acting on this information, arrived at the scene and began to dig. What they unearthed was a holster, a chilling piece of evidence that could potentially link the gang to the murder. During the trial, the prosecutor, armed with this newfound evidence, presented the holster to Freeman, and he was asked to identify the holster. Freeman denied it was his, even though before the trial he had positively identified the holster to detectives. Malcolm, a key witness in this case, recalls standing outside Freeman's room. She overheard a conversation that would later prove to be crucial in solving this case. Freeman was speaking to Sawyer and others, including Perdomo. His words were, "You better hide it good." When Malcolm questioned what was happening, Freeman's response was dismissive. He told her to mind her own damn business. Freeman, however, denied ever making that statement. A day before the trial, Malcolm identified Perdomo in a photographic lineup. The prosecutor's theory with regard to the Nelson murder was that the gang members drove to the Tweaker house intending to find and kill Green. When he was not there, they benefited the gang by killing Nelson. Officer Charles Dintz explained that Green and Krippner's actions in circulating rumors about Huero being a snitch amounted to disrespect towards a Toonerville gang member, leading to the retaliatory murder. The coordinated effort, the location in gang territory, and the multiple gunshots indicated a clear message of intimidation. He also mentioned that the reluctance to harm Weitzman upon initial encounter was likely due to the negative consequences associated with harming women in gang culture. Green was one of the key witnesses in this case, even though he was hesitant to cooperate with the authorities. Green claimed not to recognize the paperwork related to the case or remember much about it. He denied ever possessing it, speaking with Sawyer about it, or even going to Mount Air. Furthermore, Green denied speaking with Huero on the day of the shooting, showing the paperwork to Kidd, or being warned by Sawyer that the Toonerville gang was angry about him spreading rumors. However, at a later time, Green did admit to one thing to the prosecutor. According to Sawyer, the gang was not happy with the white guys because of the paperwork. In the months leading up to the trial, Green was contacted by Sawyer, who requested assistance. Green indicated during testimony that he may have had concerns about appearing in court to testify. Shortly before taking the stand, he expressed to the district attorney that showing up in court could potentially lead to trouble, using the phrase "cruisin' for a bruisin'." Martin Herrera is a Mexican national who had lived in Tujunga for approximately 3 years and was a methamphetamine user. He was not a gang member, but he was familiar with the Toonerville Gang, and he had interactions with them. This story takes us back to November 30th, 2005 in the neighborhood of Tujunga, Los Angeles. On this fateful day, Herrera found himself crossing paths with 2 individuals in an alley. The first, Perdomo, who was in blue jeans, a blue bomber jacket, and a blue baseball cap. The blue of Perdomo's outfit is a color often associated with the Toonerville Gang. The second man, Sawyer, was dressed in gray cut-off shorts, high white socks, white Nike shoes, and a gray sweatshirt. Herrera was a friend of Michael Palada, who was a resident of Pinewood Street. Palada made his living selling methamphetamine right from his apartment, and Herrera was his middleman. Herrera's role was simple yet crucial. He would meet potential buyers on the street, take their money and drug orders, and relay them back to Palada. Palada would then deliver the drugs to the buyer, completing the transaction. It was a cold winter night, between midnight and 2 a.m., on December 1, 2005. Herrera made his way to Palada's apartment to get some drugs for his own personal use. Palada often supplied Herrera with small amounts of drugs in exchange for his assistance. But on this particular night, Palada had nothing to offer Herrera. As Herrera began his walk home, he was only 100 yards from Palada's apartment when he noticed something unusual. There were 3 men huddled in the middle of the street near Palada's apartment, engaged in a conversation. One walked towards the mouth of the alley, another towards Palada's apartment, and the third remained in the middle of the street. Herrera identified one of the men as Sawyer. He recognized him from the clothing he had seen him wearing earlier that day. Sawyer was the one who walked towards Palada's apartment. Herrera identified Perdomo was the one who remained in the middle of the street. He was able to identify him based on his body type and clothing. The third person was a bit more challenging to identify. Herrera believed it was Samaniego based on his stature and form. This third person was heavier and taller than the other 2. However, Herrera had not seen Samaniego that day to know what he was wearing. His identification was purely based on the way Samaniego stood, his stature, and his form. Herrera then saw Palada step out onto his balcony. Herrera watched as an intense argument broke out between Palada and Perdomo. The heated exchange was loud, but Herrera couldn't make out the words. The tension was palpable, even from a distance. Then, Perdomo's voice cut through the night, shouting, "Tírale, tírale," Spanish for shoot, shoot. Moments later, the once quiet night was shattered by the sound of 3 gunshots. Herrera watched in horror as the men scattered, fleeing from the scene of the crime. Palada was found dead with a single gunshot wound to the head. A projectile was lodged in the soft tissue of his neck. This projectile was carefully recovered and sent for further examination. A firearm examiner took on the task of analyzing the projectile and a number of bullet fragments that were recovered by police at the scene. The examiner concluded with certainty that the projectile was a .44 caliber. This type of bullet is known for its deadly impact, often used in larger firearms. Further examination revealed that there had been at least 3 shots fired. However, the examiner could not confirm whether any of them had been fired from the same gun. The fragments and projectile were consistent with having been fired from a single weapon, but without the firearm itself, this could not be confirmed. Detective Santana arrived at the scene of the shooting. Amidst the chaos, one piece of evidence stood out: a single white Nike tennis shoe. The shoe, left behind in the haste of the crime, was recovered and sent for forensic analysis, and it was tested for genetic material. Forensic scientists worked meticulously, extracting and analyzing the DNA found on the shoe. The results were conclusive. The white Nike tennis shoe had been worn by none other than Sawyer. This crucial piece of evidence linked Sawyer directly to the scene of the crime. Palada's girlfriend, Abigail Alvaran, frequently visited his apartment. Alvaran was there on the night of the shooting. She claimed that after Herrera came over to the apartment, he and Palada stepped outside for a conversation. After their discussion, Palada returned to the apartment. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Palada, perhaps expecting another friendly visit, walked onto the balcony to see who was there. Alvaran was sitting in the living room, and she was able to hear 2 voices besides Palada's. One of the voices was unfamiliar, and she heard this voice ask Palada, "Are you slanging?" Palada, caught off guard, denied any involvement in such activities. He urged them to keep their voices down, as to not disturb his roommate. The unfamiliar voice then asked him if he was paying rent. Palada, once again, answered in the negative, reiterating his concern about disturbing his roommate. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The voices responded with laughter, and they stated that maybe his roommate should go downstairs. Moments later, she heard the sound of gunshots. Alvaran, shocked and terrified, rushed to the balcony. What she saw was a sight that would haunt her forever. Palada's lifeless body lay sprawled on the ground. She scanned the area, but there was no one else in sight. Herrera also spoke with detectives. He first spoke to Detective Brownell. Herrera claimed he was too far away to see anything and had no idea who the three people involved were. However, his story changed when he later spoke to Detective Santana. Herrera identified Sawyer and Perdomo as being involved in Palada's murder, claiming he recognized their clothes from earlier in the day. But he was adamant that Samaniego was not involved. Yet Herrera told someone else that it was Samaniego who was involved. He did not initially identify Samaniego because they were in custody together. In another interview with Detective Santana, Herrera finally mentioned Samaniego's name. He told one of the detectives that he thought one of the three men was Samaniego, indicating his uncertainty. Herrera also revealed a detail to Detective Santana. He claimed that Palada was threatened with a crossbow the day before the shooting. Harvey later testified in court. She had just finished working on November 30, 2005. She found herself at the residence on Glory Avenue. Harvey borrowed a Lincoln Navigator from a woman named Wendy Sun and drove the members of the Toonerville Gang to Palada's house. They wanted to tax Palada for selling drugs. Harvey was instructed to stop and park on Day Street, a block away from Pinewood, where Palada resided. The gang members exited the vehicle, leaving Harvey behind with the car. They disappeared down an alley, out of Harvey's sight. Within 10 minutes, Harvey heard the gunshots. Shortly after the gunshots, the members of the Toonerville Gang came running back to the vehicle. Their demeanor was far from what you'd expect after such a violent act. They seemed happy, exuberant even. One of them even exclaimed, "Way to go." Upon returning to the residence on Glory Avenue, the gang members retreated into the dark house, where they sat quietly, no one daring to speak about the horrific act they had just committed. Interestingly, Harvey claimed that she did not see any of the gang members with a gun. The next evening, Harvey saw Samaniego holding a gun. Pena was standing nearby. Harvey drove Samaniego, Pena, and Dreamer to a remote campground nestled in the mountains. Samaniego, the man with the gun, directed Harvey to a specific location within the campground. Then, he and Pena exited the vehicle and disappeared from sight. After an unspecified amount of time, Samaniego and Pena returned to the car. Harvey then drove them back to their respective homes. Kidd testified for the prosecution in the Nelson murder, and although he insisted he did not receive any reward for his testimony, detectives assured him they would assist him in accessing a drug program if he testified. Subsequently, after becoming a witness for the prosecution, he received a lenient sentence in an ongoing legal matter. Kidd felt apprehensive about testifying as he was incarcerated and feared for his safety due to the risks associated with being a snitch. Harvey faced charges related to the Nelson and Palada murders. Following her arrest, she had multiple conversations with detectives, during which she was not consistently honest. During her initial conversation with Detective Jose Martinez, she only discussed the Palada murder and did not fully disclose her drug use. Prior to the trial, but after her interactions with detectives, she agreed to testify against the gang members in exchange for being able to plead guilty to one count of manslaughter. This agreement would lead to a 3-year sentence, counting time already spent in custody. Martin Herrera had been deported but was brought back to the United States to testify on the Palada murder case. Herrera was granted formal immunity from prosecution for drug-related crimes in return for providing testimony. Ivan Samaniego, Carlos Perdomo, and Clifton Christopher Sawyer were all charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Even though there were no eyewitnesses to prove who fired the weapon in both murder cases, the jury determined that each defendant was involved in multiple murders under the special circumstance of multiple murder, and that the murders were committed for the benefit of a criminal street gang. Additionally, the jury found that a principal personally used a firearm in relation to both murders for each defendant. The trial court sentenced each defendant to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, along with 2 consecutive terms of 25 years to life.